As Pastor Marty mentioned earlier, we're going to continue with this theme, a series on What a Book, and it's a story. And it is a story which constitutes the whole book of Ruth. I'm going to read it to you this morning. And you thought I was kidding when I said that, didn't you? Really, Ruth is only 4 chapters. It takes 6 pages out of my Bible, and I'm sure yours. And I literally am going to walk through it with you because I think Steve Cohen back there probably knows this better than I know I do. It's a reality that Ruth is like a linguistic jewel in the Old Testament of Hebrew writing that has no comparison throughout the Old Testament. And so we have this nugget of truth. So I'm going to walk through it with you, and I literally am. And as a thought for you, and I'd really encourage you to go home and read it yourself. 1, read it slowly. And recognize that every word in it is there for a purpose. There's no wasting of words by the author who wrote it. Secondly, you have to make sure you read the last verse of each chapter and the very first verse of the next chapter, because each one is like it's a 4-act play. And if you don't see where it starts and where it ends and where the next one picks up and where it ends, then you'll miss the point of what the author is trying to share with us. So let's look at it. It says, in the days when the judges ruled. That's it. In the days when the judges ruled. And we do know that the days of the judges ruling was somewhere around 1400 to 1,000 years before Christ. So this story is a real story. It's not just a made-up story, but it's a real story of something that took place sometime during that period of time. And as we know from all the social disorder that happened in that period of time, which was kind of summarized with the phrase, everyone did what he wanted. Kind of like what we're doing today, right? Everyone did what they wanted. So the author says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and this is the land of Judah. A man from Bethlehem in Judah, now get that, a man from Bethlehem in Judah, and that's significant, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. And you have to realize the Israelites and the Moabites were arch enemies of each other. It's kind of like those of us who live on the western side of the Mississippi River did not get along with the people on the eastern side of the Mississippi River, but we have a famine here, and we need food to eat, and we have to find a place to go to get it. And so you cross over the Jordan River, in our case we'd cross the Mississippi River, to get to the other side, to the Moabites, and in this case to the arch enemy of people who live there. This man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judea. Notice he keeps saying that. They are from Bethlehem in Judea, and they went to Moab and lived there. That's it. That's the whole thing. He doesn't tell us anything else about where they went, what they did, their jobs, nothing. Okay. When Elimelech, that is Naomi's husband, died, she was left with 2 sons. So he died. That's it. We don't know why he died, what caused the death, how old he was, nothing. He died. And they lived with the 2 sons, and one of the sons married Orpah, and the other married Ruth. The story goes on. After they lived there about 10 years, both of these 2 sons died. And Naomi was left without her sons and her husband. And by saying that also, that when she had only herself, that meant also that her 2 daughters-in-law had not given birth to sons, and so there was no inheritance moving forward in the family. She had only 2 sons, her husband died, 2 sons died, and then what happens? Naomi, when she heard that in Moab, that the Lord had blessed the people in her hometown, Naomi and her 2 daughters prepared to return. So she decided, look, I'm going to go back home, and so that I can be there to where there's food, because I'm a foreigner here. I don't want to stay here. She wants to go home. And so they pack up and they go on their way. And as they get on their way, Naomi says, girls, look, I'm going back to Israel, to Bethlehem, to my people. Your people are here. Why don't you stay here in Moab? And then the story goes on, but basically they both said, the daughter said, no, we're going with your mom. You're a mom. And then she traveled, and then she said, no, look. I'm never going to have another son. You're never going to have anybody to marry. And so why don't you just stay in your own community, your own nation, your own land, and your own gods, and get married again and have children through them. And so one of them did. Orpah, but not Ruth. Ruth made this profound statement, and I want to read it to you because it's said at many weddings. It says, but Ruth would not. She said, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. She had become a follower of Yahweh. She had become a follower of God. She was no longer a Gentile in that sense of the word. By faith, by conversion, if you want to think of it that way, she now believed in the same God that Naomi did. Where you die, I will die, and where you will be buried, I will be buried. And then she makes this very profound, strong statement. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates me and you. Interesting next statement. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. She said, okay. Next statement. The two women went on back to where Bethlehem, the whole town is stirred because they saw Naomi come back. And so they say, Naomi, great to have you back home again. Naomi says, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mora. I'm bitter. I'm not happy. I went away full. I had a husband. I had 2 sons. We had food. I'm bitter. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. So don't call me Naomi, call me Mora. Last sentence in this chapter. So Naomi returned to Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabitess. Remember the Moabitess. Her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. That's significant. As the barley harvest was beginning. So they arrived at a time when there was some harvesting going on of the barley. We're going to see something significant about that later on. First sentence of the next chapter. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. One sentence. Introduction. There was a relative there, a relative of Naomi's, a man of standing. His name was Boaz. Next sentence. Notice this. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I have favor. So, what? Okay. Ruth says, I'm going to go to the fields. Look, I can provide food for us. I'm going to go get I'll go some harvesting. I'll just walk behind as other women do and pick up the stuff that's left over. Next sentence. She goes ahead and she does it. And then the interesting wording is in here, as it turned out, she was working in the field of whom? Boaz. You notice the author introduced Boaz up here, and then now we have Ruth working for Boaz. And Boaz is kind of walking around that day, looking around and see what's happening. He said, hey, who's that lady over there? Oh, that's that Moabitess, the one who came home with Naomi. She's a hard worker. She does a good job. She doesn't lag. She does her job. She's just an amazing woman. Boaz walked over to her and said, I noticed you. Look, you work hard. I know who you are. Keep working in my field. Don't go anyplace else. And I have told the men here, don't touch you, don't harm you, and to let you pick all you want to pick. And she said, my goodness. Why have I found such favor with your eyes, that you have noticed me, a foreigner? And then Boaz said, I look and talk to folks around here. I've heard a lot of stories about you, and how faithful you are to your mother-in-law, providing for her, caring for her. And so I want to bless you for that. And so he invited her for a meal, and then she worked there the rest of the day. One day. This whole chapter took place in one day. Ruth goes home. Her mother-in-law, who is Naomi, says, well, what happened today? Where'd you go glean? She said, the name of the man I work with today is Boaz. The Lord bless him, Naomi said. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Now here we get an introduction of a new thought here. She added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. And that's a significant piece here because it's in the line of Mahalan, her husband, or the whole family that's going on there. And that she looks at Elimelech and thinks about who would like to have his land after he's gone. And she said it would be him. And then she went on. He said, even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you to stay with his girls because someone in the field might be harmed if you went elsewhere. Last sentence in this chapter. So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. That's the end of the chapter. And so notice it went from just barley harvest time to wheat harvest time, so there may be a number of weeks that passed for this chapter. Next chapter. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Next thought, is not Boaz, with those servant girls, you have been a kinsman of ours? Naomi's thinking, I own some land yet, belongs to both Ruth and I, and if Boaz would redeem it because he is one of our kinsmen, then that would keep it in the family, and perhaps there could be a son through that marriage, and then our name would be continued forth. Naomi's planning here. And with that she said, Ruth, look, and I'll make it simple. Boaz has some nights that he has responsibility of watching where the wheat and barley are gleaned and harvested, and he stays there to protect it from thieves so somebody doesn't steal it. When he goes there tonight and he eats and drinks his fill, and he lays down, goes to sleep, what I want you to do is this. Clean yourself up, perfume yourself, look very nice, be attractive, inviting. And then go lay at his feet. Pick up his blanket and lay at his feet. And Ruth, being the obedient daughter that she is, or daughter-in-law, went and did exactly that. During that night, Boaz kind of awakens, said, what's going on here? Who are you? She said, I am your servant Ruth. Next sentence. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. In essence, she was saying, would you take me to be your wife? Would you take me to be your wife? Would you marry me? Boaz's response was, the Lord bless you, my daughter. The kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after young men, whether rich or poor. So the whole thing is he recognized that she was a woman of great integrity. And he said, look, stay here till the morning, and then he would send her home. And he said, would you also give me your shaw so I can put some grain in it so that when you go home, you will not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. In other words, he wanted to care for Ruth, and he wanted to care for Naomi by providing them some more grain because of her faithfulness and her doing what she did. It goes on, when Naomi returned, or Ruth returned, Naomi said, well, how'd it go? And she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me the 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Last sentence. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. And so now this timeline just moves along. It happened in one day. And she knew Boaz, because remember, they were family members, and she had known him from when they lived there before. And so she said, I know what he's like. He's a good businessman, and he's very profitable, and he's a man of standing. He will take care of this matter. First verse of next chapter. Meanwhile, isn't that kind of an interesting story? Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer, he had mentioned, and I left that out earlier, when he spoke to Ruth, saying, I will take care of this, what he knew in his mind was he was not the next in kin to be the one who had the first choice to redeem her. And so what he had to do with his integrity and honesty of functioning, he said, look, I'll go to the gate, and what I'm going to do when I find the one who has first choice, I will let him know what the situation is. And so he goes to the gate, and the normal way of doing things in that culture over 3,000 years ago, totally different culture than what even perhaps any one of us can comprehend. And so when he goes to the gate, then he looks for the kinsman redeemer, and then also he gathers around him 10 of the elders so that there would be witnesses to this event that was going to take place. And so Boaz speaks to the kinsman redeemer, who remains nameless, by the way, and perhaps because he never chose to do what he had an option to do, he remains that way even till this day. And so Boaz said to the kinsman redeemer, look, Naomi has this land that she's going to sell, and you have the first choice to buy it. And the kinsman redeemer said, sounds like a good deal to me. I'll buy it. I'll redeem it. I'll redeem it. As a kinsman redeemer, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth, the Moabitess, remember that? The author's not letting us forget that she was a Moabitess. You acquire the dead man's widow, that would be Ruth's husband, in order to maintain the name of the dead with this property. With this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself, I cannot do it. The point being, look, if I had a son through her, it wouldn't be my name. It would be in the name of her husband. I'm not going to risk that. I'm going to marry somebody that if I have some land, that my son would get it. Or if he died and he didn't have a son, then all of his land would go over to that family. So no, I'm not going that direction. Now, in times earlier in Israel, for redemption, the transfer of property became final on one party took off a sandal, and the other party took off a sandal, and they exchanged sandals. Pretty cool way to sign a deed, isn't it? Just exchange sandals. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people today that they were there that witnessed to the thing that I have acquired. He made it known publicly. I have acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, again, let that be known. Mahalan's widow, let that be known, that it was Mahalan's wife. It's all printed out here. as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses. Clear. Next sentence. Then the elders said, all those at the gate, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the hope of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Notice this, it just keeps getting repeated over and over again. Ephrathah, Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by his young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So they looked at this whole thing and said, maybe this is a divine providence of God acting here. We finish up this fourth act of this play. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And notice she had been married to a younger man much earlier, namely Mahlon, never had a child. Then she marries a man that's basically enough to be her father, and they have a relationship together, and she conceives and has a child, a son. The woman said, the women, not woman, women, plural, said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord who has this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in honor and old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons. My goodness gracious. 1 son is great. 7 is unbelievable. And to have a daughter who's more faithful than that. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed, which means servant, and it's kind of short for Obadiah, which would be servant of the Lord. Obed, he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Then, at the very end, the author put this genealogy in. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of, goes on and on. Solomon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. And so in that short story, we have all this information compacted in here about Moabites and a famine and names and Redeemer, kinsman, the whole process, and then about Bethlehem. Now let me just look at a couple of texts out of the New Testament. First, Matthew 1. The book. One of the authors of the Gospel of Matthew started off his writing of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, saying, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, whom? The son of David, the son of Abraham. And then he goes through a whole long list of names very similar to the end of the book of Ruth. And Solomon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Pastor mentioned her earlier. Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Ruth, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, a father of David, the king. And so we now who know who this David is, he is the king that's referred to in the Old Testament and is in now the genealogy of Jesus. And so you think about this, a book written with all that detail, some at least 1,000 years before the coming of Christ, with all that detail about the Moabites and the Bethlehem and Redeemer and all of that, and then you see it fulfilled over 1,000 years later as Matthew wrote about it. We look at the Gospel of Luke. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to where? To Judah, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And as we move through this church year, we're going to be celebrating that event of the birth of Jesus Christ. The point is this, that this simple little story, and I would encourage you to read it with more detail, just make sure you read the first verse and the last verse of each chapter and see how the author is laying this thing out from us. And if you could read the Hebrew, there's actually a tremendous amount of harmony between the first and the end verses in the number of words. It is an amazing piece of Hebrew literature. And then it all spells out what came next. What are some lessons to learn from this whole thing? We are here in the midst of COVID-19. We're here in the midst of schools, and I know some of you may be teachers, your students, your parents, jobs. All of those things are factors that create some anxiety in our culture. And so we can even get depressed and get anxious about what's happening. I empathize with all of you who have children and schooling and everything else, because I realize that can't be an easy thing to do. A lot of anxieties. In essence, we could say there's a famine in our land. And so where do we go and what do we do? There's some thoughts about that. One, what do we learn from this? God is sovereign. While we are going through this whole COVID thing right now, and I look back at actually what I did in preparation for this sermon. I was born in 1942, and I realized I was born during World War II, and I still have the little books of stamps that I remember there's one that my father had to get a inner tube for a car tire. I'd be willing to bet there's many of you in here who have no idea that car tires ever had inner tubes. And ration tickets for bread and rice and things like that. And I'm sure at that time, and I'd be willing to guess when I think about my parents, I was born in 44, my brother was, did I say 42? My brother was born in 42, I was born in 44. And I've wondered if some people weren't condemning my father and mother for, how do you have a child during a war? Things are tough. And I lived in Michigan during the 70s when there were gas wars and interest rates were 21%. And people are shooting people to get gas. I mean, so there are times when we can ask the question, where is God in the midst of all this? And we can definitely be asking it right now, as though God's going to come to us in a short period of time. But God is sovereign, and he's way beyond all of our comprehension. Secondly, God fulfills his promises in his way and in his time. Paul wrote about it in Galatians 4. He said, when the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. When did God send his son? When the time had fully come. It's God's timing and it's not ours. So when we think about all the anxieties we can have about what's happening and where's things going, step back from it all. Breathe in the power of God, the love of God, the forgiveness of God, and realize that we may not understand what's happening day to day, but God is still sovereign and he's still with us and will be forever. Thirdly, the direction God is leading is not always obvious. Proverbs 16:9 says, in his heart man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And so when we look at our own lives, we can say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Even whenever you look at this book of Ruth, whenever they were going to go over there, did they say, well, we're going to be there for a year or 2 years or whatever? No, they went because they needed to address the matters at the time. And then when those things changed, Naomi decided to come back. So things do change, and we are affected by them. Another thought, and Pastor alluded to it earlier, followers of God can and do get anxious and depressed. Followers of God can and do get anxious and depressed. Naomi said what when she went back? Don't call me Naomi, call me what? Mora. I'm bitter. I'm angry. I'm upset. Have no husband, have no sons, have no grandsons, have no children, have no inheritance. Bitter. It happens. It can happen to any one of us. You could be in a situation right now in a job things aren't going well at school. When I hear these stories about parents and teachers, every one of you have some domain of getting anxious, whether you're a teacher, a student, a parent, teacher, and student, all of those, of how do I handle all this kind of stuff that's going on in the world around me. Paul got depressed, said, the good I won't, don't want to do I do, and that which I should do I don't. He got anxious and said, Lord, remove this flesh from me. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient for you, Paul. So we all have those experiences, and we have names of people in Scripture who had those. And even the young man, the man who brought his son to Jesus to heal him, he had an evil spirit within him, and he asked God to remove it. And Jesus said, look, I can do that. And then he said, if you believe. And the man said, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. And so the reality of it is we can all look back to God and say, Lord, help me. Then finally, Boaz was the archetype of Jesus Christ, and that we do have a kinsman redeemer in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, who gave his life that we may live and have it abundantly. So God's grace is sufficient. That little short story of Ruth is something so powerful that helps us understand that God is the God of all time and is with us now, this morning, and will be with us through everything we go through. In Jesus' name, amen.